Grace and generosity. As followers of Jesus Christ, we are to be generous to people who face economic crises beyond their control. Here's Gene to explain.
Very practical principle, because Jesus once said that poor will be with us always. Deuteronomy chapter 15, in review, Moses tells the children of Israel, at the end of every 7 years you must cancel debts. Now let me just simply say that this can be a misunderstood statement. I want to try to explain later what he's talking about. This is how to cancel debt. Every creditor is to cancel what he has lent his neighbor. He is not to collect anything from his neighbor or brother because the Lord's release of debts has been proclaimed. You may collect something from a foreigner, but you must forgive whatever your brother owes you. Now, if you go to verse 7, we have an elaboration in terms of God's concern for the poor. If there's a poor person among you, one of your brothers within any of your gates in the land the Lord your God is giving you, you must not be hard-hearted. I like that word. It's a very descriptive word. You must not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted, which is another graphic illustration. You must not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards your poor brother. Verse 11 underscores this even more, for there will never cease to be poor people in the land. Even though God has promised to bless them abundantly when they come into that land, there will always be poor people in the land. That is why I am commanding you, you must willingly open your hand to your afflicted and poor brother in your land. And by the way, that's a very interesting statement, even to the children of Israel, where all these promises were made, even though these promises to Israel were materialistic promises, as it were, I should say material promises, God said there will still be poor people in the land. The reason I underscore that is that there's some people who take the promises to Israel and say it's not God's will that any be poor, even from the Old Testament. Here you have a statement, even in the Old Testament, there will always be people that are poor. In other words, prosperity theology, as it's taken out of context today, is certainly not a biblical truth. Now understand what's happening here. You need to go back to Exodus chapter 23, verses 10 and 11, where God said, sow your land for 6 years and gather its produce, but during the 7th year you are to let it rest and leave it uncultivated, so that the poor among your people may eat from it, and the wild animals may consume what they leave. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. Now, in essence, what I believe Moses is saying here is that if you have lent money to the poor, what's going to happen come this 7th year when they try to pay you back? They don't have any money to pay you back. Consequently, the debt is canceled on the amount they owe you for that 7th year. You're not to collect anything on that debt during that 7th year. He's not saying you cancel all debt. He's saying during the 7th year when everything is lying fallow, so no one is able to gain profit, you certainly don't want to try to collect from the poor in that situation. So when you understand that principle, it really is dealing with being gracious and generous to people who are indeed facing economic crises beyond their control. But the greater principle here does relate to the poor. And the New Testament addresses that. Jesus addressed that. But look at James chapter 2. And here he uses the illustration of salvation by grace through faith. James is writing, he says, what good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? And then he illustrates here what kind of works illustrate faith. And it has to do with how we treat the poor. And here's the illustration. Can his faith save him? If a brother or sister is without clothes, that's desperate. He's literally talking here. He's talking without clothes, without proper clothes to take care of your body, to protect you from the elements, and lacks daily food. You can get a hold of that. No food. This is dealing with starvation. And one of you says to them, that is, this person without clothes, without food, well, just go in peace. keep warm, eat well. I mean, that's about as hard-hearted and tight-fisted as you could ever be. But you don't give them what the body needs. See, that's the critical issue. What the body needs. Food, clothing. And then he says, if you say that, what good is it? In the same way, faith, if it doesn't have works, is dead by itself. So he's using our attitude towards the poor as an illustration, one illustration of good works that demonstrate that we have true faith in our hearts that has brought salvation to our own soul. So he's dealing here with grace and generosity in this particular situation. And so the R&R question is, how can our local churches, and here again, let me just underscore that we're in this together. We're in this together as local churches, as bodies of believers. Together we are to care for those who are in need. How can our local churches demonstrate generosity to needy people without allowing irresponsible individuals to take advantage of the situation? And Paul addressed this in the Thessalonian church because they had a problem. And notice what he said about brotherly love. You don't need me to write to you because you yourselves are taught by God to love one another. What a great compliment. In fact, you're doing this towards all the brothers in the entire region of Macedonia. And there he's using the word brothers generically, brothers and sisters. But we encourage you, brothers, sisters, to do so even more, to seek to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands. And that is a great statement. To work with your own hands as we commended you so that you may walk properly in the presence of outsiders and not to be dependent on anyone. That's God's goal. That's God's principle for all of us. But still, there is the fact that there are those who are in desperate straits and beyond their control, they're not able to really deal with their situation and meet their physical needs. And people like that exist. It existed in Israel. They exist today, among believers even. In 1 Thessalonians principle 8 goes out of that, which says to help believers become dynamic witnesses in this world, we must encourage them to practice a biblical work ethic, not to be lazy. And Paul used those words because there were lazy people. But this is not what we're talking about. This is not the principle we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are in desperate straits, in situations that are beyond their control. And so we need a system in our churches to discover those who are truly in need, set up guidelines, and there are ways to do that, to find out if there's truly a need. And that is not difficult to discover if you have the right system. But I think there's a concept that grows out of this Old Testament setting and the New Testament setting. And one of the true tests, until you really understand people's situation, you don't give them money. You give them food. You give them clothing. You deal with the specific needs. And one of the best ways to discover if a person has a heart that's pure is when you give them money, they take it and waste it. Or if you give them food and you give them clothing, they're hostile because they want money. I've seen that unveil a heart very quickly. I've even seen that dealing with people in the Skid Row sections. Used to walk streets in Chicago, have people come up, say, can I have a dime, $1, or whatever. They'd say $1 now for a cup of coffee and some food. And you say, I tell you what, just around the corner, down there, Pacific Garden Mission, they'll give you food, they'll give you a place to live, they'll take care of you. And I've had people walk away swearing at me because they basically wanted the money to buy booze. So you need to be sensitive. There are people who will take advantage. But this is talking about people that are truly in need. And the principle reads, as followers of Jesus Christ, we're to be generous to people who face economic crises beyond their control. And obviously we need a system to determine that. And as bodies of believers, we're involved in this together. And every local church should have that kind of system.